Thank you very much, Speaker, and it's a pleasure to rise and make a contribution on this matter of public importance as submitted by the member for Sandringham. And I'll just clear up one little error of many made by the member for Eureka, Speaker. There are more Liberal rural MPs than there are now Davids in the Liberal Party, so we just get that on the record. Now, this House does express its deepest concern at the rising cost of living pressures facing Victorian families and the policy failures of this government. The big issue here, Speaker, and where this government has had a massive fail, is that we have massive state debt spiralling out of control and absolutely nothing at all to show for it. When you're facing debt levels, the worst that we've ever seen in the history of this state, you actually want to see some other things getting better for the debt that you are incurring. But what have we got? Cost of living out of control. We've got a health crisis with waiting lists that are absolutely disgraceful for people who need urgent care. We have a mental health crisis where people in dire need cannot get an appointment. I have people in my electorate who are suicidal and are told they've got to wait 3 weeks for a bed. We have a public dental crisis with a waiting list of well over 12 months and in many areas of rural and regional Victoria closer to 24 months. We've got a roads crisis where our roads are falling to bits. Our transport and trucking companies and bus drivers are saying they're the worst they've ever seen, and so on and so on. But at the same time all this is happening, our debt is spiralling out of control. We are showing nothing in services on the ground for the debt that we are incurring. But I want to get back to cost of living pressures and what it's doing to individual and specific families. Due to cost of living pressures, we've got more people living in cars. And while the government can't directly control interest rates, there's much more that they can do to assist those that are struggling financially, sleeping rough, sleeping in their cars. But whenever we raise housing affordability and we raise homelessness as an issue, the answer we get is, well, the big build's underway. Well, the big build's going to deliver 12,000 homes. Our public housing waiting list is already just touching on 70,000, with half of those on the priority waiting list. That is not going to solve the problem. 5,000 of those homes have been built, 7,000 are to come, but while they're being built, the waiting list is getting greater because of the mismanagement of this government. The big housing build is not the short to medium term answer that we need, and it is cost of living pressures that are driving people to sleep rough, sleep in their cars and couch surf. So the question is, what's the government going to do about it? They're going to put in place more rental assistance, more short-term accommodation for families. They're going to look at more affordable housing. But we're hearing nothing about this sort of thing, nothing at all. And many of these people that are sleeping rough have jobs. I've got one gentleman sleeping in his car near the back of my office. He goes to work every day, but he can't afford the cost of living expenses. He can't afford the rentals and the child maintenance that he has to pay. He cannot afford it. One thing this government can do is support those many agencies that are supporting these people in our community. I was at St Vincent's last week and seen the great work that they've done, but they're struggling. Their volunteers are stretched. Their support from government is not to the level that it needs to be. And I can tell you, it's an issue now. In 8 weeks' time, 10 weeks' time, we're going to be getting into winter. We'll have the first frosts, and then we will really see these people who are suffering hardship going to another level, and we need to get more supports in place. Victorians right across the length and breadth of this state are facing power bill increases of over $1,000 on their bills. $1,000 on their bills. When we raise that in this chamber, the answer that we get is we're putting out another round of the $250 power saving bonus. That's good, that helps, but it is really insignificant when you're facing power bills of over $1,000. We have an energy crisis that needs to be fixed, and a $250 power saving bonus will not fix it. If this government's going to just simply hang its hat on that bonus, we're in deep, deep, deep trouble. I had a look at Hansard this week, and in 2015 the Energy Minister stood in this chamber and said, "Energy is an essential service for all Victorians. Without access to energy, Victorians cannot cook food for their children, wash their clothes for their family or provide warmth to the elderly. This is why the Andrews government is ensuring positive outcomes." Now that was 2015. What do we think has happened with our power bills between 2015 and now? I'd like to make a comparison between then and now. They've absolutely skyrocketed. Right through the period in between, we've heard time and time again how this government's going to put downward pressure on energy costs and power bills. Again in 2018, we heard the minister say that they were going to cut the cost of energy for Victorian households and small businesses. I mean, are we kidding? Where is that? Where is that? It hasn't happened. Ask a small business how their power bills have gone since the minister made that comment. In 2018, she said the boom in clean energy happening in our state is ultimately benefiting through more affordable prices. I mean, where do we get off just telling these untruths? Power bills have gone through the roof. This is a minister that's committed time and time again to lowering energy prices, lowering the cost of living, and hasn't delivered. Speaker, I want to talk about another emerging crisis, particularly in our rural areas, and that is in relation to firewood. We have thousands and thousands of householders heat their homes every winter with firewood, but this government has locked our harvesters out of the bush. It has limited firewood contractors from getting into the bush and firewood contractors from getting the residual timber from our timber mills. They are contacting my office saying we will not be able to supply firewood to our regular customers this winter. Now, when you make decisions like you have made in relation to the timber industry, you've got to give weight to these sorts of conditions. We all know the situations where we have members of our community sitting around with the blankets over their lap because they can't afford to turn the electric heater on. We have situations where I was talking to the member for Morwell earlier today, where he has a family that he's taking the barbecue into their house to light the gas to warm their home because they can't afford to turn the heater on. We've got people with the oven door open. I mean, how healthy is that? And huddling around it to get warm. People going to bed at 4 and 5 at night because they can't, in the afternoon I should say, because they can't afford to turn the heater on with the power bill. And what are we doing now? We're dropping access to firewood and we're cutting off access to that cheap energy supply for people. And we know what happens when there's a reduction in the availability of something. The price goes through the roof. It is something that desperately needs to be fixed. What I've outlined here, Speaker, is just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to the cost of living fiasco this government is overseeing. Home ownership is slipping further from the grasp of many. You've got a situation where we're paying nearly $4 billion in interest annually. What would that do? What would that interest bill do to offset the cost of living expenses? But worst of all, no repayment plan. We're heading for a debt of, in excess of $150–60 billion with nothing to show for it on the ground. You either want, if you're reducing services from government, you want to see your government debt coming down. If your government debt's going up, you want to see some results on the ground that support and assist people. But we've got debt going up, a health crisis, a mental health crisis, a dental crisis, a roads crisis and everything else that's going on. They're heading down the wrong path in both directions. And what has left a lot of people scratching their head, really scratching their head, is how we are going to get out of this. How are we going to get out of this? No matter how those people on the other side of the chamber want to stand up and sugarcoat what they say and talk about these little positives and what we might have done 8 or 10 years ago, deal with the here and now and the crisis you're facing now. We have a massive, massive cost of living crisis in this state on so many fronts. We're heading into winter. It is going to get worse. In the second half of this year with the forecast interest rate rises, it is only going to get worse. This government has got to come up with some real actions to solve these issues for Victorian families because they're doing it hard enough now. We don't want to see it get any harder and this government simply must do better.